So let's take a look at photosynthesis in more detail. For photosynthesis, the overall reaction is going to be 6H2O plus 6 water plus light is going to yield C6H12O6, which is glucose, plus 6O2. So water plus carbon dioxide plus light will give us glucose and oxygen. There are going to be two steps in photosynthesis. We are going to call those two steps the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. In photosynthesis, this is going to take place in the chloroplast. This is an organelle that's inside of plant cells. The chloroplasts will have a double membrane. They have an outer membrane and then an inner membrane. The inner membrane has foldings which create membranes called thylakoid membranes. These thylakoids are going to be in stacks called granum or grana. And these stacks of thylakoids are going to contain pigments and proteins, and this is going to be where the light-dependent reactions take place. Inside of the chloroplast, there's also going to be the stroma. This is going to be the space in between, and this is going to be where the light-independent reactions take place. So let's first look at the light-dependent reactions. So in these reactions, what's going to happen is that the energy from the sun is going to be used to produce oxygen and high-energy electron carriers. So what's produced during the light-dependent reactions? So we're going to produce oxygen, which is one of the products of photosynthesis and is a good thing for us since we need oxygen in order to breathe and in order to survive. Light-dependent reactions are also going to convert ADP, which is called adenosine diphosphate, and NADP plus to energy carriers ATP and NADPH. It's going to convert light energy into chemical energy. Whenever we look at light-dependent reactions, the goal of this is really to create those high-energy electron carriers because the electrons that are inside of the chlorophyll are going to be excited and going to be what's actually going to carry that energy from one spot to the next. Here's a visualization of that so you can see the light coming in. It come into something called photosystems, and photosystems are just going to be chlorophyll that's going to be inside of the thylakoid membrane. Chlorophyll is a pigment that's going to absorb certain wavelengths of light. It actually reflects green, which is why it looks green, or why the plants look green. But it's going to absorb light energy and create these high energy electrons. Those electrons are going to be passed down the chain, and so you can see kind of this chain where all of these electrons are going to be passed, and it's going to create then this NADPH. And that NADPH is going to be used as an electron carrier and a way to transfer the energy from the first step of photosynthesis to the next step. Light-dependent reactions are going to take place on the thylakoids or the thylakoid membranes. And again, the photosystems are going to be found in the thylakoid membranes, and they're going to contain chlorophyll, which are just pigments, and then proteins. The purpose of these is the purpose of the photosystems is to absorb sunlight or light energy and then generate high energy electrons, which would be chemical energy. The steps of the light-dependent reactions are as follows. First, light is absorbed by photosystems and high-energy electrons are passed to electron carriers. Then those electrons are going to be transported along an electron transport chain to NADPH to make NADPH. Oxygen is going to be produced because water is going to split into oxygen, hydrogen ions, and then some electrons. So water in the light-dependent reactions is necessary. This is why plants need water, is because it's going to then allow it to be split to produce electrons and then allow for the release of oxygen. The last step that happens is going to be that ATP is produced when hydrogen ions cross the thylakoid membrane. We call this process something called chemiosmosis, which is a big word, but it's just essentially how ATP is made. ATP is a form of short-term energy that's going to then be passed on to the next step. So the products from the light reactions that are going to be used in the dark reactions are going to be ATP and NADPH. So in summary, the light-dependent reactions are going to take place in the thylakoid or the thylakoid membranes. Oxygen is going to be released, water will have been used, and ATP and NADPH are going to help build high energy sugars and transport energy for light independent reactions. When we look at the light independent reactions, we can also call them the Calvin cycle or the dark reactions. During these reactions, we're going to convert carbon dioxide into sugar. So we're going to take NADPH and ATP from the light dependent reactions and use that to build high energy carbohydrates. This is going to take place in the stroma of the chloroplast, which is the space between all of those thylakoids. Here's a good summary of what we're looking at. So carbon dioxide is going to come into the cycle. We're going to use energy from ATP and NADPH, and we're going to use that in a cycle form to make glucose. We'll also produce NAD plus and ADP because we've used then this energy from here, and they've been converted into what you see here on the bottom. The steps of the light independent or the dark reactions are first that the carbon dioxide enters the cycle. CO2 will come in from the atmosphere through the stomata, which are the holes or the pores at the bottom of the leaves. Then glucose will be produced using the energy from ATP and NADPH. This is a pretty complex process, as you might imagine, but basically the carbon dioxide is going to first combine with some 5-carbon molecules with the help of Rubisco. It's going to make 2 3-carbon compounds, and it's going to make something called pGal, which is then going to combine to make glucose. The important thing that I want you to remember is that carbon dioxide's coming into the cycle. It's going to be combined to eventually then make glucose by utilizing the energy from ATP and NADPH. They're going to make 6 molecules of carbon dioxide to then produce the sugar molecule. Energy is supplied from ATP and NADPH, and then the sugars are created at the end. When we look at the end results of photosynthesis, we have light-dependent reactions that trap the energy from the sunlight and transform it into chemical energy, and then the light-independent reactions take the chemical energy and produce stable, high-energy sugars from that carbon dioxide in the water. Oxygen is going to be a byproduct that will be released again from the light-dependent reactions. Here's another summary picture of what we've talked about. Some factors that affect the rate of photosynthesis include temperature, light intensity, and water. As you might imagine, if you have less water, then you're going to have lower rates of photosynthesis because the light-dependent reactions are not going to be able to take place. For light intensity, we're going to be looking at a high intensity of light is going to increase the rate of photosynthesis until it reaches a maximum rate. For temperature, temperature just helps with the function of different enzymes. So there will be an optimal range, and then above and below that will impact the rate of photosynthesis. When we look at water again, we can look at how the shortage of water can slow or stop, and so this is why it's important for the guard cells to control if the stomata are open or closed. With photosynthesis, whenever this happens in the desert and plants that are in the desert or other plants in extreme conditions, there are 2 different ways that photosynthesis can happen. We have C4 photosynthesis, which occurs if there's low levels of CO2, so there's not enough reactants for photosynthesis to take place. This process will help the process to continue even though it's at high temperature and low water. There will be extra energy that's needed for this. For CAM plants, this happens in dry conditions, so not a lot of water, and there will be modified light-independent reactions that will trap the carbon in the leaves to use during the day.